Welcome everyone to our Now Foods monthly webinar. In today's webinar, we're trying something new, and joining us today is one of my favorite speakers and one of our very own at Now Foods, Neil Levin. Welcome, Neil. Are you ready to take on the questions?
Sure, I do it all day long. Why not now?
Okay, here we go. One of the questions I wanted to start with, can you just tell us briefly what's certified clinical nutritionist, and also what is you have the initials after your name, DANLA. Can you just give us a background on that?
Yeah, the CCN requires typically a college degree and some postgraduate work to get that credential. The certification test for clinical nutritionists, which is one of the things that the Clinical Nutrition Certification Board that I serve on, one of their tasks is to create these tests, revise questions, update them, etc. And in states like Illinois, where nutritionists can be licensed, it's actually accepted that the CCN test as an alternative to the dietitian test for being a rigorous test that would allow you to get the state licensure, along with a certain amount of practice hours and the educational requirements. And the rigorousness of it is just more or less equivalent to being a dietitian at that point in terms of education and other requirements. The DANLA is a diplomate in advanced nutritional laboratory assessments. And what that is a typically that a diplomate is a post-grad work in a specific area. Advanced nutritional laboratory assessment is a fancy word for saying all those tests that you would do, urinalysis, organic acids, blood tests, hair analysis, etc., for nutritional assessment.
Okay, well, very good. That certainly helps to explain your credentials. So let's start with the questions that I received by email. There was one that said, I am concerned about products from China. Where do you get your spirulina and chlorella?
Well, some of those products come from India and some come from Inner Mongolia, which is a region of China. And a lot of people are concerned about China. And I'll tell you a few things that might reassure you. First of all of China is not horribly polluted. These are products that are grown in controlled environment. The water is controlled. It's man-made ponds. It's not grown out in the wild where it's subject to environmental issues. So it's a very clean product. It's tested for all kinds of toxins, including mycotoxins and microbes. It's tested for heavy metals. It's tested for pesticides. Anything you can imagine would be in there, as well as identity and nutritional value. And you could look at it kind of like China's about the size of the United States. And you might have Los Angeles being polluted, for example, but the Central Valley, maybe 100 miles away, they're growing fairly pristine organic produce. You've got Houston, probably the most polluted large city in America, and not too far away is the Rio Grande Valley, where again, they're growing a lot of organic products that are very nutritious and actually fairly clean. So in the same way, you can have different areas of China, some of which have bad industrial pollution and some of which do not. And it's more the cities that tend to have this pollution, and that's not where they're growing these kind of products. The other thing I'll mention is that in China, it's the largest single source of pharmaceutical grade materials. And if you're talking about vitamins and amino acids and those kind of things, what is a pharmaceutical grade material? It is the most tested, the most pure, and the most rigorously assessed materials on Earth. So pharmaceutical materials are both vitamins and amino acids. You've seen USP, for example, on labels, but also the pharmaceutical drugs themselves. Most of the ingredients are made in either China or India, with the predominant amount made in China. The US FDA has actually tested and assessed the pharmaceutical facilities in China. A lot of them are US FDA registered, and the FDA has actually trained hundreds of Chinese FDA agents and people who do the appraisals of these, who inspect the factories, in other words, and the facilities, where they're being done to world standards that are as good as in the USA. Beyond that, when we get a raw material, we make sure that they're either third-party certified by somebody we respect, like ISO 9001. You've probably seen those kind of things on some of the marketing or some of the credentials for various companies. So if they have a third-party certifier that says they're following rigorous GMPs, which some of them are well beyond the dietary supplement ones, they're pharmaceutical or other ones that are very high. And if they have that kind of certification, we can look at their paperwork and know that they're being third-party audited by somebody we trust. If they're not, we send our own auditors before we'll buy from anyone in China. So yeah, you can buy crap from China. You can buy the best materials in the world from China, the best quality. And it really depends on the ability of companies like ours to inspect, audit, and assess how good the quality is of these companies. So that's something that we actually send auditors out, and we have people inspect the audits from organizations that are trusted, that are international organizations, like the International Standards Organization, ISO, as it would be one example, where we know the quality of the materials we're getting, and then we test it for identity, purity, heavy metals, microbes. Proteins are tested for melamine and steroids, for example. We're doing pesticide screening, trying to see if there's any detectable pesticides, especially on organics and on root crops and things that are susceptible to pesticides. So we know where a lot of these issues are and what to look for, build that into our specifications, and make sure that we're both auditing and testing for all this wide range of possible quality issues.
Excellent. So now we can rest assured. Next question. Can you please explain the brain attention silk protein and how it crosses the blood-brain barrier?
Yes, and I just got some information from my friend and colleague, Dr. Luke Bucci, who's one of the researchers who was working on this. It's a peptide or a protein fragment from actual silk. And this is a Korean folk remedy that's now been translated into real science. They've done clinical trials on the material, children as young as 7 years old, to look at attention, memory, focus, and other issues, as well as for adults and seniors. And the way it works primarily is as a microcirculation aid. This is kind of the same category that you would look at, say, ginkgo extracts as being an aid for adding circulation to the brain. And in some ways, this is doing a similar thing. It does tend to cross the blood-brain barrier because the brain likes these particular peptides. And in fact, the brain will use some of these peptides to normalize the structures and the membranes within the brain and help maintain them where you're not forming abnormal structures and proteins in the brain, which is a potential sign of aging or actually a risk factor for memory issues. So this is the method by which it works, primarily by microcirculation, aiding the flow of nutrients in and toxins out. And the blood-brain barrier is primarily a barrier against water-soluble nutrients. It is not really intended to exclude fat-soluble nutrients. But then there's other substances like certain amino acids or peptides or things like acetyl groups where the brain wants to use them as materials, and it's going to let them through the blood-brain barrier. So we've seen, for example, acetyl L-carnitine going into the brain better than L-carnitine because the brain wants to make acetylcholine from the acetyl group in the acetyl L-carnitine. And in the same way, the magtine, our magnesium L-threonate, gets through the blood-brain barrier better than normal magnesium because of the threonic acid, this particular amino acid attached. So the brain does like certain peptides and amino acids, even though they're water soluble, and does not exclude them. It actually prefers to have them transfer into the brain.
Okay, well, we on that note, we have another question about the blood-brain barrier and threonic acid. And someone wants to know, does Alpha Sorb C get vitamin C into the brain because of the threonic acid?
No, threonic acid works on certain types of cells. It's actually the glucose pathways, or GLUT, G-L-U-T pathways into cells. And there's 4 main types of cells that works on: muscle cells, fat cells, immune cells, etc., but not brain cells. And one of the ways the Alpha Sorb works, and this is actually a product I designed, so I'm very familiar with it and with the mechanics of vitamin C absorption and transport. When you take vitamin C, it oxidizes. The half-life of vitamin C in circulation is about 30 minutes. You have to be able to consistently recycle it or recharge it from an oxidized state to a reduced state or antioxidant state. You have to be able to use other antioxidants to recover it. And alpha lipoic acid does that. It is an antioxidant that recharges vitamin C. But it has another benefit. It helps to transport things through these glucose pathways into cells. And primarily it's doing that for glucose. However, vitamin C in most mammals is made from glucose. The livers of most mammals are going to convert blood sugar or glucose into vitamin C, ascorbic acid, and transport it through glucose pathways into cells if there's good insulin sensitivity. Now, the other thing that alpha lipoic acid does is it supports proper insulin sensitivity. And it partially does that by acting on the B vitamin inositol to make it act as an insulin mimic and improve the sensitivity of insulin, or of the ability to move blood sugar out of the bloodstream into cells, partially through these glucose pathways. So it's not specifically for the brain. There's not a transport mechanism there that's going to go through the normal blood-brain barrier, but the brain only will accept unoxidized or reduced vitamin C. It will not accept oxidized vitamin C. The glucose pathways will accept oxidized vitamin C, and so the alpha lipoic acid can not only transport the vitamin C into certain cells, whether it's oxidized or not, it can actually recharge that vitamin C to reduce it back into the antioxidant form during and after the transport.
Okay, and this for me is a great time to plug Now Productology, because we do have in our lecture section, Neil did a presentation on the pathways of vitamin C absorption, which is fascinating. So if you're looking for more information on that, check out Productology in the Now Retailer portal. Okay, next question. Need my glasses here. Regarding vitamin D2 and MK7 benefits, what is the tipping point? What I mean is, what level of people who are taking vitamin D2, at what dose or amount should they be taking MK7? Is it 2,000 international units or 5,000 or 10,000, where there may be just too much osteoclasts going into the veins and arteries? That's foreign to me, but
yeah, I understand the question. And D2 and D3 work equally well at physiological doses. In other words, if you're doing 400 or 1,000 or a couple thousand IU. There's really no difference in the studies of vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. The difference appears at the heroic doses, which is another way to say huge doses. Like, for example, giving 50,000 international units when you go to a doctor's office. The difference shows at those high levels from the long-term survival, in other words, your ability to measure vitamin D in the serum weeks later from a single dose earlier, which is not supplementation. That's a medical model. So the medical model at high doses shows a difference that has not been shown in the supplement area where people are taking a normal amount. So, if you're doing 1,000 or 5,000, you're really not going to notice much difference between D2 and D3, except some of the assays to measure your blood for vitamin D are looking only at vitamin D3 metabolites, and they're not looking at vitamin D2 metabolites or the hormones and other substances that are made by vitamin D. Vitamin D is really an intermediate thing in the body. It's not the end use of these materials. You're just looking at something that's somewhere on the path to that. So that said, vitamin D helps you absorb your calcium. It does not help you get your calcium from circulation into the tissues where it belongs. In order to build bone, for example, which is one of the uses of calcium, you need something like 15 nutrients. You need everything that's in a multivitamin pretty much, plus protein to make bone. So in order to get that, let's say you're missing zinc or you're missing boron or you're missing something else that is necessary for bone building, you're not going to be able to form that tissue properly, and you're going to have deposits of these other nutrients, especially if you're taking high doses. Vitamin K, especially the vitamin K2 form, is used for transporting that calcium from the bloodstream into cells and tissues where it can be better utilized. So it's not just the osteoclasts and osteoblasts, which are the cells that are breaking down and remodeling and rebuilding bones, but it's the actual transport of the minerals to those areas that is dependent on having these nutrients. Now, vitamin K1, it tends to hang out in the liver and make clotting factors, and to some extent working on this calcium transport. Vitamin K2 has a much stronger role in the calcium transport and scavenging it from the bloodstream. The MK7 form, which is typically found in natto, which is a fermented soy food, and more recently we came out with a version that is a fermented garbanzo bean or chickpea as an alternative for people who are afraid of soy, even though they both have isoflavones, so they're not that different. But there's a lot of fear of soy, so we have to come out with soy-free formulas to meet those needs. So vitamin K2, the MK7 form, is by far the best absorbed, by far the longest half-life, how long it lasts in circulation. But a lot of it works by converting into MK4 as a primary active form. But taking MK4, you don't absorb very much from the gut, and it doesn't last very long. So you actually get a lot more bang for the buck by taking the MK7, some of which is doing its job in that form, and some of it is acting as a pool of conversion into the MK4, which is your common vitamin K2. When in the diet, about 90% of vitamin K is from green leafy vegetables and grains, which is your vitamin K1. And about 10% is your vitamin K2, which is really kind of a fermented source of vitamin K. And MK4 is one of the more common forms in, say, cheeses or other things like that, where it's been processed by an animal, and there's been some fermentation or conversion process that allows it to turn into the K2. And in the same way, the natto is using a fermentation to turn the vitamin K in there into a form of K2 that's an unusual form, the MK7.
Okay. Here's a question. Someone wants to know, can you put the Now essential oils in water or use them in recipes? They say that other companies say they can do this with their oils.
Okay, well, other companies are getting warning letters from the FDA, so that's not a good idea for a company to do things that are illegal. It is not legal to put on a personal care or an aromatherapy product that it's internal grade or food grade or anything like that. That requires a nutrition facts label. And what is an appropriate serving? Let's say you have something like peppermint oil that is grass. We had a snack today that had peppermint oil as one of the ingredients in it, but it was a baked good. And what's a serving size? How many drops of peppermint oil do you think you get from a tea bag? Or how many tea bags of peppermint tea do you think that it would take to give you 1 drop of peppermint oil? And most people aren't going to know this, but it's going to be 20 or 30 tea bags worth of peppermint tea to get the equivalent of 1 drop of peppermint oil. Now, if you were to drink 20 or 30 cups of peppermint tea a day, you probably would be a little raw in your throat and your stomach, as you can imagine, from all that oil. And even though it's 1 drop of oil. And that's how strong these essential oils are. The serving size, even if it's food grade, might be a 20th or a 30th of a drop. So yes, it might be appropriate to use in a recipe where you're putting 1 drop in and you're getting 20 or 30 servings. It's not appropriate to put a drop of essential oil in water or some other beverage and drink it every day. We've actually had people who had to go to the emergency room after a month of doing that with a drop of peppermint oil because they're eroding the mucous membrane in their digestive tract from their throat on down. It is not safe because these are super, super concentrated oils that are not really at appropriate serving sizes for internal use. We do have an FAQ on our webpage explaining which ones are considered grass, generally regarded as safe, and can be used in preparing food. We also list which ones are not considered grass. They are not from foods. They are not considered foods. And the oils from these non-foods are also non-foods, so they would never be used internally. That said, there are plenty of cautions, and that's not allowed on foods. You have to have nutrition facts panels. This is a big issue, but we are compliant with federal law. The FDA reviews all of our labels, and because we export, we have to submit them to the FDA and get an export permit from them. They have to rule that we have a legally labeled product. Other companies are getting warning letters for saying they're food grade, take them internally, and they're probably getting adverse events of people going to the hospital or the emergency room hurting themselves because they are inappropriately labeling their products. We're a responsible company. We do not want to hurt our customers. So there you have it. We don't label ours for internal use, even if they're food grade.
Yep, and so important. I don't think we can stress that enough because we just forget how potent they are. I got another question here. Any suggestions? A retailer wants to know what can be done with supplements that have reached their expiration date?
Well, we actually have another article about that on our webpage. And what we have is typically not expiration dates, but best by dates. And if they're kept sealed and dry in a cool, dry place, they'll often keep beyond the best by date because we're guaranteeing the strength and potency of that product through that date if it's kept as directed. Now, if you just opened a bottle and it's maybe a couple months beyond date, you forgot you had it or whatever, that's happened to me. You're not the only one if that's the case, or your customers. really you would examine the product. You'd be more suspicious of oils and things that can go rancid, obviously. If you see any discoloration or any sign of moisture in there, if it's been open for a long time, if it's been in a moist place such as a kitchen or bathroom, or in a moist climate. We have people who are in Florida or other places where it's warm and moist, or other countries even. Singapore would be one example. And it's warm and moist there most of the year. And if they don't keep it refrigerated or put it in glass or do something to protect it, it might not even keep through the best by date because it's not a cool, dry place. So I would advise to look for this on our webpage. We do have an article on stability and how we can, is it safe to open products or to use them beyond the date on the bottle? Because best by date is an advisory date and a guarantee through that date. It is not really an expiration date. It's not that it's good on this day and then it's dead the next day. You would expect a normal curve depending on its conditions.
Okay. We are coming up to the 3:30 mark, but if you're game, Neil, if you have time to hang out for a few more questions, we can go ahead and take a few
folks,
more.
Sure.
Okay. So with that said, when customers come in and say their doctor said they need calcium, if they buy the calcium magnesium basic supplement, not our bone supplement, but just the basic CalMag, would that be of any help to them? Why or why not? So I'm guessing she's asking in concert with the calcium and magnesium.
Well, I mean, calcium, magnesium is going to work better than just taking calcium for most people. You need equal number of molecules, and calcium is approximately half the weight. That's where the 2-to-1 ratio comes from. And if you don't have magnesium, that's one of those things you're really not going to be able to build bone because you're missing one of the critical things. They also work in concert on other things. For heart health, for example, the contraction of the heart depends on calcium, and the relaxation after it squeezes is dependent on magnesium. So you need the calcium for contraction, magnesium for recovery from that, for relaxation. Now, if they're saying to come in and get calcium, that doesn't necessarily exclude a CalMag D or a CalMag DK or a bone building formula. They can get the calcium as part of that with everything else they need. And a lot of times, when I was working in the stores for many years, that was something we would kind of quiz them a little about their diet. Are you eating a high calcium diet? Are you eating a lot of greens? Are you eating sources of vitamin D? Kind of if you can get a quick assessment of what they're eating and what would balance their diet, then you might better be able to recommend which of the products they want. And they want a small pill the size of an M&M that you take once a day and gives you all the calcium you need in a well-absorbed form. Well, it's not going to happen.
Okay. Someone else is asking, we have a few customers ask if Now is reformulating an eye formula based off the ARIDS 2 case study. Is this being considered?
We are, and we're actually not far from that. The ARIDS really has the same kind of nutrients we have. We have some extra nutrients and extra potencies in ours. Ours would really do the same thing. It just doesn't match up exactly. So there's nothing wrong with these formulas in terms of meeting that kind of study. The eye doctors like the ARID studies. There's some other really good studies that our products match up to. The LAST, the lutein antioxidant study 1 and 2 at Veterans Hospital in North Chicago, Illinois, from Dr. Stuart Richer, for example, and his group are very well done studies. They're the studies that showed lutein could at first slow the progression of macular degeneration in the first study and actually reversed it in the second study. So we do meet other studies. There's not just one study, and but it's the one that eye doctors tend to talk about, and because some of the large pharmaceutical companies selling eye vitamins have decided to talk that one up. So it's not that our product isn't as good or won't work as well. It's just that's the more famous one today. 10 years ago, there were other famous ones, or 5 years ago, that it's not that one's more valid than the other or that they contain different nutrients. It's just the exact level of the nutrients vary a little bit.
Okay, another question came in. Why is there rice maltodextrin in the original stevia, but it is not in the organic, and how is that still considered nothing artificial?
Well, rice maltodextrin is just rice starch, so it's a way to dilute and give a more measurable amount of the stevia and disperse it in liquid. So rice maltodextrin is a rice starch that's considered hypoallergenic, and it is, for the non-organic material, it's fine. When we needed an organic material, we had to use something that itself was certified organic because it comprises most of the volume and weight of the material in there. When you're talking about stevia, you can buy pure stevia extract that doesn't have any maltodextrin or inulin or anything added, but it's not easily measured. A serving's like a 32nd of a teaspoon, so so it's a little pinch. To dilute it and make it disperse better, we are using these dilutants or diluents that allow us to take a spoonful and put it in a liquid and mix it up. So there's no organic-based alternative or a non-organic but still clean-based alternative. Rice maltodextrin is not anything artificial. It's just rice starch.
Okay. Why do all of our vitamin A supplements all contain soybean oil and other ingredients?
I think a lot of them are using vitamin E derived from soybean oil as an ingredient, and we've pretty much, if they're not all gone, they're on the way out. Using soybean oil as a filler in soft gels is something we're pretty much done with or almost done with. That consumers are afraid of soy in some cases. In most cases, it's not a rational fear. It's something that they've been told they should be afraid of, even though phytoestrogens in soy are no worse than eating pinto beans or hummus or something else, and legumes are actually very healthy foods. And even the American Cancer Society says there's no evidence that eating soy foods is harmful even to people who have had breast cancer. There's no evidence. This is a theory. But a lot of people are afraid of it. I've seen studies that soy protein is actually beneficial for male bodybuilders and is not estrogenic. There's at least 2 good studies I've seen on that, but there's still this fear. Most of the case when you see in a soft gel soy, it's either going to be lecithin as an emulsifier or vitamin E as an antioxidant for that. We're trying to switch from vitamin E from soy to vitamin E from sunflower, but sometimes we're buying materials that already have these in there. For example, a vitamin A or a vitamin D, these fat-soluble nutrients might come to us already emulsified, already preserved with components like this. And so we're trying to make sure they're non-GMO, first of all. But then we're looking for alternatives to the soy to meet these consumer demands.
So will we eventually see the soybean oil completely phased out?
We would expect that as far as soybean oil as an ingredient, but it takes longer when it's part of the ingredients. If the active ingredient is vitamin A or vitamin D or a natural flavor or something that's got lecithin or vitamin E in there that's derived from soybean oil, we have to either find alternative sources or wait for the suppliers to decide to make that change.
Okay. I think I've got one more question, well, two more questions regarding the pet line, and we are coming up to almost 45 minutes. But per the pet formula, can the weight management supplement be given to cats, although it says for dogs?
If it says just for dogs on there, I would not cross the species barrier. Cats and dogs have different toxicology. They have different metabolisms. They have different liver functions. If it's labeled for one and not the other, there's a reason for that.
Okay. And what is the reason for lysine only for cats?
Well, lysine is something that tends to be low in their diet and to benefit them. So lysine has benefits for immunity. It has benefits for tissue growth and repair and other functions. It's an essential amino acid. And the diet of cats tends to make them a little lower or a little more susceptible to being deficient than for dogs. So it's something that a lot of vets like to give them to normalize the diet, to bring up this essential nutrient. And a lot of times there's both expected and perhaps unexpected benefits by improving the nutrition of a key thing like the lysine, an essential amino acid.
Okay. Well, that was some great questions that we got. I appreciate it very much, Neil, and I thank everyone for joining us. I just want to remind you that if you ever do have a question, you can email our product information team. We have a whole team who answers questions all day long from retailers and consumers from around the world. They are at productinfo@nowfoods.com. And Neil, do you know the phone number offhand?
It's 888-NOW-FOODS.
There you go, 888-NOW-FOODS, and I think it's press 5, is it, for the...
Talk to a nutritionist for product info is typically option 5.
Okay, very good. So they're always available. They'll get back to you. I have used them myself, and it's just great information. It's a great resource that we have at Now Foods. So
we do go home and sleep at night, though. We're not always available.
No, only during business hours, but they will get back to you. So you can send them in on the weekend, and you got to wait till Monday morning, but that's okay. Again, productinfo@nowfoods.com. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you, Neil.
Thank you.